Welcome to Chain Reaction, late night recording edition. And by that, I mean everything is the same except for I have wine instead of coffee. I am your host, Jeremiah Mitchell, joined today, as usual, by Jeremiah Harding. What's up, man? Good to see you. How are you?
Yeah, well, I'm reasonable, and I have the opposite of wine as usual. But um,
Yes, the opposite of wine. Are you back to energy drinks?
I never left. I was just trying to do a detox so that I
Gotcha.
was no longer addicted like I was. And
Okay.
yeah, I'm not addicted anymore. Like I'm not having like thousands of milligrams a day.
You're actually being a little more reasonable with that.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, control is a really big deal. I know I have a lot of friends who call themselves alcoholics that haven't consumed any alcohol in many years, and that to me is a frustrating. That way of perceiving yourself is a little frustrating because it they see themselves as alcoholics even though they're obviously not. They might have an addictive personality, but they're not drinking any alcohol. But alcohol still has this sort of mysterious power over them where they can't drink it or else they'll drink too much. Like it's still treating it as this thing that really is kind of their victor and in a way still defines who they are even though they haven't consumed it in 20 years because they don't actually have control of it. The ability to moderate for most things, I think, is far more powerful and far more human. The closer to what we are supposed to be as humans than the ability to abstain completely. I think
Well,
moderation is like a more full life type of ability.
I think it's like many things that are involved in society in general. It's that it's a cultural problem. It's when people have entrusted their entire belief systems to sort of authoritarian structures. Those authoritarian structures get to deem what their appropriate recovery looks like. For instance, from alcoholism in this case, the state forces people to go through anonymous programs and forces them to go to 12-step, and all of these programs tell them that essentially they're homeless under this alcohol, and as a precondition to leaving the program, you have to admit a higher power, and in doing so, basically. A lot of these people, while they accept some sort of higher power, in the end, they also accept that the alcohol is their higher power because they don't admit that they can lead. They're so vexed by this thing that the state has put over them that they feel that it's the only way out. And then culture is sort of bent around that because now everybody has to admit that they're an alcoholic if they've ever been an alcoholic, no matter whether or not they've had alcohol recently. Because otherwise it would be going against the fabric of the programs that they had to go through to leave, and otherwise it would be going against the fabric of the programs that other people who've never gone through the programs and never been alcoholics think are the part of the fabric holding society together. So it's is like deeply connected to the coercive nature of the state.
I don't know people, or I don't know of any for sure that have had to go through the program because of state requirements. Do you know how common that is?
It's pretty common. People will say that, a judge, for instance, will say that somebody who got a DWI repeatedly will have to go through these programs and communities in order to continue living outside of jail. And so this happens pretty regularly.
Okay. I didn't know it was the 12-step Alcoholics Anonymous one that they had to go into. I think for most of them though, like even the higher power thing, you can talk about that higher power being like something within you. You don't really need to. It's just the way they want them to think about their life. They want people to feel like there's that they have some other source of power that's new for them that they didn't have before, and that's why now things will be different. But if you actually look at the effectiveness of AA, it's not that great of a program at all. It's helped a lot of people live better lives than they were living for before, for sure. But its percentage effectiveness not ideal. I'm guessing there
Well, I
are
mean,
there are
but
better
like
ways that
even
just
if it
haven't come
helps
about.
some people,
What's that?
right? Well, but I mean, even if it helps some people in some ways, the fact that it requires them to basically hamper their personal ability to deal with things by saying that they need a higher power in order to deal with them, to me, that's a huge problem.
I don't know if it's a huge problem or not. I think their ability was already quite hampered. Certainly, eh, my my dad's side of the family, pretty much everyone was an alcoholic and involved severe beating of many children. So in that sense, I'm like, yeah, you might feel less about your personal ability to uh, overcome obstacles, but damn, it sure is nice that you aren't getting drunk and putting your kid's head through the wall. So that's what comes to mind. I'm like, well, better than the
But like
alternative,
then the
but
other people who can putting their kids' heads through the wall, those people are also affected by the program
your audio is becoming almost
and
unlistenable.
what a drink one night.
Your audio is almost unlistenable. Can you either try reconnecting or just going to audio only? That might work a little better. Well, Harding disconnected for today's show. A couple should be pretty quick. I think it is rather late, not super late, but a little late at night, and I don't want to be out too long. I still have to walk to the grocery store to get food for my cats. But I was thinking Harding was interested in talking about Nazi furries, and we might talk some 9/11 conspiracy as well. Hello, Mr. Jeremiah Harding? Speak to me, baby. Okay. Turn your video off and see if that helps the audio.
All right.
Because we can't keep going on like this. All right. Now speak to me,
My
dear
video is
sir.
turned off. Did that help at all?
Oh, that is infinitely better. Yeah, even with a poor connection, that's all right. So I guess we're just talking this way, which is fine.
I've had extreme internet connection issues all day, and so people in my neighborhood. I don't specifically know what it is, but I know that it's definitely a sign that they need to improve the lines. Because to be honest, I probably could blame them and be correct for the previous audio issues that we've had, the line static and all that sort of shit. So I'm sort of generally irritated with them.
Yeah, just in case our listeners are interested and want an idea, we did a speed test check on Harding's connection after one of our shows with a lot of audio problems, and it was like a little over half a meg per second. Which I can't believe we even got a video call going at that rate. Very slow, which is, I mean, I always think about Wisconsin as being relatively slow because I used to live in Minneapolis where things were a lot faster for a lot cheaper because there was more than one competitor. Right now, I have zero cable internet provider competitors. Which, if you do any research into that, you will figure out what the problem is. And it turns out it's federal, state, and local regulations creating monopolistic privilege for companies, driving up the cost and decreasing the speed and quality of customer service of internet of ISPs. So I know you'll all be shocked that I'm going to blame the state for something. It just happens to work out that there are so many damn things that they are responsible for that are a pain in my ass. All right,
Yeah.
Harding, you wanted to talk about, well, yeah, you wanted to talk about being called a Nazi furry, which is relatively unique. There's a lot of very, very specific and surprising identifications going on these days. Thank you, Internet, for exposing us to so much. So tell us about why you dress up like a rabbit with swastikas on.
Okay, so the thing originated with this user on Twitter who I had never heard of before. Um, who says he's a husband of somebody who I've also never heard of before. Um, and this person says that, like, because I checked and saw, like, in a private window whether or not I had ever spoken to him or husband, just to make sure that I was, like, not an asshole at one point and didn't troll and wasn't, like, drunk one night and said some things I regret. But no, it was not a similar thing to that. Um, um, I think that's only happened to me like twice, maybe. But I woke up the next day and I don't remember Sieg hailing on the internet. But what I was generally okay. So this person named Chip Fox with two X's, which I've learned is an amalgamation of a chipmunk and a fox, and so that's an interesting and non-existent thing. But
What's that?
um, yeah, I guess. They made they blocked a bunch of people, okay, and I guess that, like, I was one of those people, and they just made a list out of those people, claiming that they were part of a hashtag called AltFurry, and claiming that that hashtag was, full of um, Nazis and extreme right wing people and nothing but. And so the amusing thing was that um, this list came out, um, and one of my longtime followers, who changed his name from Travis Retriever to Warsong Retriever, so that he could talk more about specifically politics on one handle and not like the furry stuff so much on that handle. His handle was in the
Don't mix
list.
furry with politics. That's always been my philosophy.
Oh yeah, definitely. But he was on that list, and somebody let him know pretty immediately because they, like, people talk when they're members of communities. Um, and he let me know by tagging me into the post thing, uh, that I was in this list, and he said, insanity is free, and Stefan Molyneux, who is not a furry, um, and the
No, he's
latter
a
of which,
baldy.
yeah, right. Like he couldn't be a furry unless he got Bosley. So I mean, I don't know what it specifically they wanted, um, other than to just smear a bunch of people they didn't like. Like it was either really reckless and extremely stupid or directly defamatory. And
There
this is
is this
just,
strange pleasure people get from slamming people they don't like.
yeah.
Quite fascinating.
Well, it's Schadenfreude. I mean, like, pleasure in other people's misery, but I just it was pretty funny because immediately I get inundated with furry followers, um and like immediately after that, I
You know something that
looked
has
through.
neugh happened to me on Twitter? I have never been inundated with any followers.
uh well, it's what happens when you start, like, using Twitter more than like a video game. I sort of treat it like a recreational hobby as well as a way to spread
Okay.
politics, because
Yeah.
it's so easy to get, like, proverbial high scores on that service. Um, but
Nice. Now, if they just had an app for good behavior where you could get high scores if would by acting in line with the way the government wants you to, we'd be
China's
set.
working on that along with Riot Games, which
I
is the
I know.
makers of League of Legends.
Yeah, it doesn't Canada isn't Canada working on something like that too?
I think it's a fork off the same project, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Yeah.
But
They're smart.
but
They're really smart.
yeah, but so I get inundated with these furry followers, and one of my responses to that has been to create a group message for people in the list. And most of the people in the group message are not Nazis, and like many of them are even on the far left. Transgender activists and shit like that. People that Hitler would probably want to gas. Um, so the whole thing is pretty funny. And then there's this article that comes out on this fucking idiot site, um, Dog Patch Press, and the whole thing is just really cringe to look at. Um, their slogan is new fluff pieces every weekday. Um, but the fucking thing here's the alt furry block list, a powerful tool to reduce hate spam by Patch of Fur. Um, and it goes into it, and it gives explicit and detailed instructions on how to block all these alt furry members. One of whom, like in the fucking screenshot they took, I know
Seeking
this person,
purity in the furry community.
right?
It is
Um,
amazing how much these small niche groups tend to divide amongst themselves along various unrelated reasons.
yeah, and it's relatively like, okay. So here's the first paragraph, just to give you a taste of what this article has to
I
not
can't wait.
offer. Um, Eh, Have you ever hung up the phone on a jerk? Frozen out a bully who acted like a wasp in your hair? Rejected a stalker who can't stop asking to sniff your socks? Shut the door on a creep who wants to get you into a crackpot religion or to sign a petition to legalize hunting at zoos? Blocked spam to sell you a miracle cure for crotch rot made from the powdered toenails of Peruvian jungle sloths? Good, you stood up for yourself like an adult and moderated a nuisance, and now the power is yours to do it better than ever, at least with one hate group. So that's the kind of dramatic bullshit that they were doing at the beginning. Um, and the screenshot, the first screenshot that they took of how to do this, has somebody in it immediately that I know is not a fucking Nazi. He's not, like, I don't even think right wing, and I recognize this account from Gamergate, and so it's funny because it becomes really immediately obvious, even in the article that this person wrote, that one of the people they blocked is not the kind of person that they were saying you should block. It's really fucking stupid. And so you keep on going. Oh no, blocklist sounds like blacklist. At least if you don't think too hard about simply separating signal from noise. But blocking is a self-defense against nuisance. A list empowers you with crowdsourced support to moderate your boundaries, and if you've been ganged up on, it can handle aggression like jujitsu, especially the more widely it's used. Right off the bat, expect predictable complaints. It's as if standards which everyone uses, like spam filtering or safe for work limits for a group, are somehow antithetical to a free-floating ideal of universal free speech. It's as if there's no community attached. Everyone is there for themselves, and consequences don't exist. Supposed enemies of free speech might point to the I'm not going to finish reading this. It's bullshit. Okay, so um essentially the entire idea of this article is to convince people to use this. Apparently they're also, like, I had to open every link in a private window because they're mostly to Twitter accounts that have blocked me using this list. But
Oh,
the whole idea of this article is to just say exactly why you should use this list, exactly why, even though this list includes people that aren't alt furry, or even furry in general, you should still use this list because it's not perfect, but basically whatever. And just generally, the whole idea of this article is to say that it's entirely legitimate. Use it, and it doesn't matter, who you affect with it. You're moderating spam, so they should go to fuck themselves. But my response to this is basically, um, hi, I don't get, and I said this in a comment that's still awaiting moderation. Hi, I don't give a shit if I'm on some dumb list made to isolate people from differing opinions. This has happened to me before countless times in countless ways, and the kind of lame brained sheep who would blindly follow what someone else's definition of hate is instead of blocking individuals based on their own parameters isn't precisely the kind of person my content would help anyway. But this is a smear tactic and nearly nothing else. The idea that a non-furry like me and Stefan Molyneux, who is also on the list among others, and an anarchist like me could be added to a list for far right-wing furries who, by the label, are simply sick of mainstream GOP politics, means that the original creator didn't give a shit about creating a powerful tool to reduce hate spam. They simply wanted other people to think like they do, similar to Randy Harper in oh so many ways. But many of my followers were also on the list, and many of those didn't qualify as right wing, much less alt furry. So the whole thing is one giant joke of a concept from the outset. In that spirit, I created a group message of my followers in the list, and we're a cabal now. No block list will stop us, and attempts like these to create echo chambers under the guise of being against Nazism, among other things, are just pathetic. Leave me in the list or don't. I don't give a shit. I'll keep speaking what I think is the truth, regardless of what mindless hacks decide to mass block people because someone else said so. God damn the torpedoes. Pass that along. That was my general response. So now that you've been inducted into part of furry culture, you- you're welcome for that barrage of information, listeners,
I can't
and
wait to get
also
more
fellow
involved.
Jeremiah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've really not been active in the furry community, and it looks interesting at the very least. But never tried to be a stuffed animal before, but
Yeah.
might fit me.
I just, the whole thing is absurd. It's really, like, everybody I've told about it has laughed, especially the people I know in real life,
Yeah,
off
well, it's
the
such a
internet.
just it's so absurd on its face. Just well, one, it's almost as absurd. Well, no, it's more absurd to call an anarchist a Nazi than it is to call someone who has never been involved with the furry community in any substantial way and never been a furry. They're like equally nonsense labels.
Yeah, and of course, thousands of people have used this block list, so now I'm blocked by thousands of furries I've never spoken to, including the main people who made and proliferated the list.
I do not know why anyone would ever use a block list, nor why anyone would write an article about people that need to be blocked. That to me is one of the most fascinating parts. What are you doing with your time? Why do you think this is useful?
Well,
Just
because they're
don't
isolating
follow
social
this
justice
person.
snowflake hacks.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, that's true. There are enough people that are so weak emotionally and mentally that they have a really hard time dealing with ideas. Although whether they actually do or not, I I tend to think a lot of them are just kind of faking it because being hurt in today's society, feeling hurt, is a means to control others by making them
Absolutely.
feel bad. It's often used as so that you can fake being hurt and then you can feel like you have power, like you have the higher position because now you've been wronged and this person owes you and they are now you have influence over them that you didn't before because you went all
It's the
victimy.
oppression Olympics.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate I appreciate anyone that doesn't put up with that. Trump doesn't seem to, which I do like that aspect of him. He doesn't seem to be like, "Oh, you're saying I victimized you. Oh, okay, let me pander to your victimization." Not that I like Trump. I just I appreciate his willingness to speak honestly and stand his well. Speak honestly is not the right word. To be harsh even when people are claiming victimhood is more like it. And he retweeted a gif of him hitting a golf ball into Hillary Clinton. She fell over while walking into the plane. I mean, I don't know that we will ever have another president who does that. So there's at least that we can cling to and say that's kind of funny. It's like a sideshow. He is a bit of a circus.
Well, I mean, on that level, if you if you think that presidents are voted in some way, then absolutely that's a possibility that he'd be the last one. But if you're someone like me who's a conspiracy theorist, you might end up thinking that the whole thing is a reality show, and the next president will have to be more absurd than Trump.
Well, I certainly hope you're right in that regard. We need more. We need increasingly absurd presidents. That's my stance.
Mm.
All right. One thing that I wanted to talk about, and I do want to get out of here relatively quickly, so I'm going to ask you to be brief. But just thinking about the chance to have a conversation with Jeremiah Harding, I wanted to talk a bit about being like 9/11 truth, being a 9/11 truther, which I'm assuming that Mr. Harding is, and I don't know if that's how he would identify or whatever, but
Well,
basically,
I could accept the label of truther,
okay.
but to be honest, I'm more of an all around conspiracy theorist where nothing this government says is entirely true. So, um, I mean, the 9/11 thing is just going to come with that, in my
Yeah.
view. Um, but beyond that, like to be completely honest, the entire story is trash, absolute trash. You end up with like first off, you know about the passport, right?
Yeah, that a passport survived.
And
The-
they
and they
automatically assume
and
that
they
the
found it.
passport belonged to the guys.
They found it was a fire so hot it collapsed a ginormous, strong, not that old of a building, but it did not consume the passport. The yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you do you I don't know how well versed in it you are, but can you just like give like three reasons why you think the official narrative should be doubted?
All right.
I'd like to just kind of walk you through with a few questions I think might be helpful and interesting to me.
Okay. Well, the first thing is that they knew about it well in advance and did absolutely nothing while this plane with a completely unexperienced pilot descended at a really oddly perfect angle to hit the building at exactly the perfect angle to collapse it in free fall. So that's really absurd, and the engineers for 9/11 Truth will let you know that. But beyond that, you end up with uh just there's there's the idea that the government who was sponsoring terrorism, the government who had bombed a Sudanese pharmaceutical factory, and resulted in the deaths of 30,000 Sudanese people. The government that had been seeding the Middle East with depleted uranium wouldn't knock over two buildings just because that government's people is totally absurd from the outset. But then you get into the idea that you know maybe it wasn't the US government, but maybe it was somebody who was affiliated with it, because you end up, for instance, Larry, I forget his last name. I'm going completely off memory here, but Lucky Larry was out of the building along with a huge amount of employees that would have been there on a regular basis. There was that BBC footage that doesn't circulate very widely anymore, that said that one of the buildings had collapsed when they hadn't yet.
Yeah, Building
Um,
7,
yeah, and
26
that
minutes before it fell. BBC
yeah,
said it had collapsed and then it did.
yeah, and so there's that absurdity as well. But beyond that, Lucky Larry had taken out an insurance policy and cashed in big
The owners of the
on the
buildings.
the owner.
Yep.
Yeah, and
None of his
cashed
family
in
was in the
big.
building, even the people who worked there on the day it happened. by chance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then and so those are two pretty big coincidences. We have a super skilled pilot who's relatively new. We have a guy who sought to profit from the situation, but then we have the 9/11 Commission report, which was entirely done off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. And so even the commission report itself has this just hazy level of incredulity, and you
Yeah,
end up
it was
with this
basically a
narrative that is just totally trashed.
yeah.
It's not a real thing. And so, like,
No, it
whether or
was
not the U.S. government did it, it was still a conspiracy.
yeah, it would for that to be a real thing, it would have to be an independent third party having access to everything. And and then researching him, but it was definitely not independent. It was all state chosen.
Exactly. And by that token, by it being, entirely state done, it's sort of like when a police officer kills somebody and then they do an internal investigation and find out that they did nothing wrong. It's that exact same mindset. And then, you end up with movies like Zero Dark 30, which glamorize the capture of bin Laden, and the whole thing, if you pay attention, just looks like a reality show. I mean, the movie showed inhumane torture. Zero Dark 30 did.
Yeah.
It showed inhumane torture of the highest degree. It showed, hundreds of people being subjected to increasingly bad, inhumane torture. And it shows this woman at the end crying because she finally oversaw the killing of bin Laden, even though, like,
Yeah,
his
crying
it,
for joy, really, or maybe
yeah.
that's kind of what it seemed like. It's
and and
pretty crazy. Yeah, it's so funny
and the
how many
raid on
people.
Abbottabad was illegal.
Yeah, I mean, well, who cares? um, but yeah, I mean, the thing about Osama bin Laden is so many people reported he was dead long before that. That's one of the craziest things to me. I mean, I have no idea what happened. They might have went in there and killed Osama bin Laden. That very well could be the case. But
But we
to
don't get to see the body.
but you don't get to see the body, and it's not a public uh, throwing away of the body. They just did a funeral and threw him out to sea, as if that's like some sort of proper Muslim, honoring him thing to do. With most of the other deaths of high figures like that, they like to advertise it and make a really big deal out of it, as big as they can, and they try to use that as a political tool for their future. But when they killed Osama bin Laden, it was like, yeah, we killed him, just trust us. We are presenting you next to no evidence. Oh, by the way, here's an image of Osama bin Laden dead and bloodied. Oh, just kidding. It turns out that's not him. You found that out, but just so you know, he's dead and we killed him. When according to many sources, he died quite a few years ago, not that long after September 11th. He was pretty sick for a while. Not that that's what happened. I have no
Well,
idea. But they're a bunch of fucking
not to
liars.
mention the fact that his name was Tim Osmond, according to the CIA, and then a bunch of things changed, and then suddenly he was a terrorist, and then suddenly he was responsible for 9/11,
Uh,
and then suddenly he was like dead.
oh yeah, you're gonna have to. You don't have to, but I would appreciate if you link me to him being Tim Osmond by the CIA. I've never heard that before.
I'll show you that one. Yeah,
Okay.
it's and like his reasons for disliking the U.S. government, his publicly stated reasons for why 9/11 happened was because of their constant funding of Israel, and him
Yeah.
watching Israel and U.S. world powers constantly killing who he termed Arabs. And not caring about the lot of the Arabs and just using them and radicalizing them for the for U.S. foreign policy,
Yeah.
using the Mujahideen as like a big club against U.S. enemies. And he said that that was the reason why so much terrorism in 9/11 happened in general, and why Al Qaeda had such strong support, because the US government is a big group of terrorists who don't call themselves that so that they can establish a world global dominance hegemony and, keep killing people for fun and profit. And, if you think of people as just evil terrorists, that doesn't make any sense. But if you think of people as like well-reasoned adults, who have
or
maybe
or at
some
least
sort of
rationally
reason to
self-interested
do what they
adults.
do.
I don't know how well
Right.
reasoned all the terrorists are, but they have some sort of rational self-interest for
I'd say
for as a reason
that
for
they're
doing terrorism.
probably I'd say that they're probably pretty equally as well reasoned as the US government is.
Yeah, pretty close. Also on 9/11, I'd like to get out of here in 10 minutes. I want to know what you think happened. Think about that for a sec. I just want to make a couple of comments on the reasons for Al Qaeda and well, like their number one or their many recruiting messages that they use to try to get more people to join them. At least around the 9/11 era. Among them are the 500,000 dead Iraqi children as a result of U.S. sanctions on Iraq in sanctions and blockade on Iraq in the mid 90s, about which Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State, said that yeah, she thinks that the deaths of a 500,000 Iraqi children is worth it, so that you can punish Saddam. So we punish Saddam by having a bunch of children starve to death and die of nutrition related diseases, which is fucking sick. And U.S. bases in Saudi Arabia on Holy Land, which they said they would remove as soon as Desert Storm was over, that they never did, as well as the consistent U.S. regime change policy that was present well before 9/11 ever happened in the Middle East. And on some of the reasons for, or the recruiting tools at least, and the reasons why people commit these terrorist acts, Scott Horton has a great article from quite a few years ago called, I think, They Hate Us for Our Foreign Policy, which is worth a read if you're interested in just kind of getting
Absolutely.
a broad overview on what some of their motivations could be, other than they hate it, other than we're just too free, or we're just too Christian, and they're crazy Muslims that want all Christians to die. Which religion's certainly a part of it, but not the biggest impact, influence. Okay,
Or on foreignpolicy.com, the article that's really aptly titled, "It's the Occupation, Stupid."
yeah, that's a good one. So what do you think happened on 9/11? Do you
Okay,
have do you
so
have a
I don't really have a specific concrete thing I can say here, but what I can say is that one of two
okay?
things happened. As far as I can tell, either the U.S. Um, opened all possible channels to allow this to happen, and to had the passport in general because of like channels that they had already opened,
Right.
so that they could craft this narrative, um, and radicalized people specifically to do this task, because one of the tenets of radical Islam is that it doesn't matter what you did while you were alive. If you die doing holy work, if you die doing the work of Allah, then you can still go up and be with your 72. But the like, if that's true, then that would explain why the terrorists involved um, did so much cocaine, lived with pink-haired strippers. Why all of this shit, which would be idiosyncratic with Islam, happened because they knew that they would see their reward according to their religion, and they were radicalized mujahideen. That makes total sense to me in the term, because that's the only way that I can think of where this plane wouldn't have been shot down. I mean, 30 people in the plane versus 3,000 outside of it seems like a really easy calculation for
government that has sprayed toxic chemicals full of biohazard over San Francisco in the fog to test whether or not they could save the entire country theoretically from a biological weapon. I think that they would be able to make that sort of calculation without any sweat. Because it would look bad. There would be a dead plane full of dead people, but if they had already planned to do this sort of thing, then I could see not intercepting this plane, not stopping it from going where it was going, not stopping the these planes anyway, not stopping the other plane from going into the Pentagon, not stopping any of it if they knew that it would benefit them. And you know what was in World Trade Center 7 and the Pentagon at the time? A bunch of paperwork involving the financial ruin of the United States government, involving missing money that in the trillions. And so when those buildings collapsed, a lot of sensitive financial data collapsed with them. And so to me, that would seem like a really easy way to fix some shit is to, destroy a budget analyst's office or two and completely rewrite the way that people would perceive that part of history. But beyond that, if the U.S. government did do it, then it would not be hard in the slightest to record things to play over the news to tell their monitored news affiliates how to react, um, and to have like the rest of the news media follow it like the puppies they are, like the lapdogs they are, not the watchdogs, and just do specifically what they wanted them to do for this big Panem Circenses show where they're like completely controlling the narrative. But it's either one of those two things, as far as I can tell from all available data. It's either that the U.S. government wanted it to happen and let it happen, or it's that the U.S. government wanted it to happen and made it happen. Because I can't picture the current narrative being the real one, especially since so many people that have questioned this narrative have been essentially blackballed from whatever profession they were in. And especially since also the conspiracy theorists have been so widely panned by the U.S. government that it seems like a cover up operation on its face, where they can make, the entirety of conspiracy theorists look very, very bad by pointing at these group of heartless monsters who are questioning what these terrible, dastardly, evil brown people did on 9/11 instead of like just accepting that these terrible, evil, dastardly brown people are terrible, evil, dastardly brown people that should be justification for the invasion of Iraq, which they weren't from, and should be justification for U.S. global foreign policy, which engendered huge amounts of profit and
Yeah.
footholds near manufacturing sectors where things were being outsourced to. So, I just can't imagine this being the way that the official narrative says it is, and the cover up would imply that the U.S. government was either implicitly or explicitly, overtly or covertly involved. So, those two are the only ways that I could really say it was.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right. It's 11. I do want to get out of here. 11 for me, um, Central Time. So, yeah, just in case anyone's wondering what my thoughts are on 9/11, I know kind of people both. I know people on both sides, as if there's only two sides. There's really a lot more than that that are very rational. That I kind of generally trust, not implicitly with everything. So it's a weird. It's not weird. It's just that it seems like there's of a lot of good people that think quite differently on 9/11, including just a bunch of anarchists. I mean, I think Scott Horton, who is a great foreign policy guy that I mentioned before, he doesn't think, that he definitely knows the government's hiding stuff with the present narrative, but he thinks, generally planes crashed into buildings and then the buildings collapse because of fires. So he believes sort of your general sort of narrative. So where I stand, I mean, I'm just, it's obvious that the state is deceptive in this particular area, and it's obvious that they have done everything in a very clouded and foggy and propagandistic way, which means there's a really good chance that they are hiding a bunch of significant stuff. But I mean, I have no idea what happened in particular, and I tend to think that the people who crashed the planes into the building had fairly good reasons for doing so, or not good reasons. They were rational self actors in a way who were brought to the point of deep desperation, partially the result of U.S. foreign policy, which had made them or gave them reason to engage in really desperate and evil acts. So I could definitely, I can see reasons why it would be a government cover up and reasons why it wouldn't, but for sure its convenience is very, very high for a multitude of growths in state power and hidings of state evil, and provides a great scapegoat so that people can blame their problems, even blame problems that are obviously caused by the state, and blame state intervention into their lives on a group of terrorists of a few hundred people who live thousands of miles away, which is all Al Qaeda was back in those days, was a few hundred people. But since the U.S. has been arming and funding them directly and indirectly, well, they're a lot bigger now.
Yeah.
All right, let's get out of here. Oh, happy Constitution Day, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that.
Yeah, of course, Constitution Day, where we can celebrate all of the freedoms the Constitution has protected us from.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I am so free right now. I think I'm going to just, take a walk through downtown and smoke a joint. That's how free I am. Chance I get arrested, 98, probably. Or you want to plug anything?
Well, I just had Shane Radliff of the Liberty Under Attack podcast on my Moment of Rage show, and I'm going to be discussing more in detail the Nazi furry thing on my next Moment of Rage. So if anybody wants to tune into that, then they can do that, because I'm fucking, I don't know, it's too good not to mention at least twice. So I'm going to do it in those forms. Also,
yeah, I've been running some tests, and most of our listeners listen in case we will mention Nazi furries. So this episode is going to be off the charts. Good news, man. Yeah.
And so that in general, and also I'm on Steemit, and I'd recommend everybody else get on Steemit as well, because they have a new video platform associated with the Steemit blockchain called DTube, and it could fuck with YouTube if it became big enough.
Cool. All right, I don't have anything to plug. Please get a hold of me by sending me a letter. If you can do that, I will be not very impressed, but surprised you took the time and energy to do so. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can check a different episode where I tell you what my Twitter handle is. All right. Thank you all for listening. I hope you have a good week, as always. Yeah. Love your life. Hate the state. Thanks for joining me, Harding. See y'all later. Peace.
No problem.